The first time I was ever called the N-word was in Morocco. I like to say I grew up with my humanity intact. So when I got to be older and went to PWI institutions and were in spaces where I was the only one, and when I encountered macro and microaggressions and downright racist incidents, it hit different because I know myself and I know my sense of value as a person and as a human being. And that's not something that you can shake once it's been fortified inside someone. Every so often I'll see a thread online that asks, when was the first time you had a Black teacher? And some people will say 6th grade. Some people will say high school. Some will say college. Others might say never. And that question always stops me because it reminds me of how specific my own childhood was. I grew up in the Washington, D.C. area, so in Washington, D.C. proper, and then Prince George's County. And where I grew up, having Black teachers, principals, and just community leaders was absolutely normal. I didn't grow up thinking that my race, or my gender for that matter, meant that I was somehow deficient. Now, as a parent thinking about raising a child outside of the US, I keep coming back to this question, which is, can I give my child the same foundation that I had, or am I choosing a different kind of inheritance? So when I think about what growing up in PG County gave me, I think about how it was an environment that normalized Blackness and made it the default and not the exception. It was a place where, as I've already indicated, Black people were and are community leaders. African Americans live next to Black immigrants, and Black life just coexists and exists. And Blackness then is just an adjective. It's a floor and not a ceiling because it doesn't mean rich, it doesn't mean poor, it doesn't mean educated, it doesn't mean uneducated. It just wasn't a bar or a ceiling for how far you could go in life. And when you grow up in a space like that, where your racial identity is just an adjective in a lot of ways, it enables you to fortify yourself as an individual. I like to say I grew up with my humanity intact. So when I got to be older and went to PWI institutions and were in spaces where I was the only one, and when I encountered macro and microaggressions and downright racist incidents, it hit different because I know myself and I know my sense of value as a person and as a human being. And that's not something that you can shake once it's been fortified inside someone. And I realize that this is maybe not a unique experience, but it's not something that everyone has access to, unfortunately. So as I grew up and moved to different parts of the country and different parts of the world, and I started experiencing what it was like to be in this same body, different region, different rules, I started to appreciate even more where and how I grew up. So as I moved and lived in other parts of the US, this question of what changes when Blackness isn't the norm? A whole lot. It is how I realized that when the Black community is small, or when it is one that has not been able to thrive, when it's a marginalized community, the assumptions made about people then becomes really different. And as I moved or studied, worked, did whatever I was doing in different places abroad, I think the theme that started coming out for me was, what happens when systems don't account for everyone? When institutions are really built around the majority experience? For example, I, like many people, studied abroad in college, and I studied in Spain. in the south of Spain. To this day, I remember how they did not really prepare students of color, I would say Black people or African descent, as well as Asians, say, depending on the location, for what we might encounter. We were told we would eat paella and dance flamenco, see the sights, but no one told us that you might be mistaken for a prostitute in Las Ramblas. No one told us about pockets of xenophobia in different places, not to scare us, but just to make us aware. And so you end up with these really rude awakenings when you go abroad. And I don't know that it's intentional per se, but it is because when people are planning, when people are thinking of who and what an American is, they have a very particular idea in mind, and that idea does not always encompass everyone. And so when I think about my time in Morocco, I think a theme that comes out with that was this idea of xenophobia layered onto anti-Blackness. And I don't think that that speaks for all of Morocco. I've been there several times, so I'm not saying don't go there. I'm not saying don't go anywhere in particular, but it was just about who was assumed to belong and who was not. Now, the first, I would say, a couple of times I went to Morocco was a time of great socio-political upheaval in a lot of ways. There was a big influx of sub-Saharan Africans migrating through Morocco, trying to get to Europe illegally. Or by any means necessary, maybe I should say that. And so xenophobia was not uncommon. The first time I was ever called the N-word was in Morocco. And I come back to, though, how, although it was difficult experiences, and it was hard to understand how people in this space that I was excited to come into, to learn about, to contribute to, looked at me in Arabic we say بنظرة دونية. So, looked at me as less than. It still didn't hit the same ways as it would have had I not known who I was. And, believed in myself, in my intelligence, in all that I brought to the table. I definitely credit growing up where I grew up with enabling me to see that the problem was with individuals and not with me. So now as a parent thinking about raising my child abroad, I really do feel like I'm choosing between different kinds of gifts. On the one hand, I want my child to have multilinguality. I want her to have cross-cultural fluency, global ease, exposure to other cultures and societies. But when you do that, or to get that, you may end up losing out on things that are also important. Can you have all of that and still grow up with a sense of Blackness as the default? Can you grow up never questioning your belonging and your sense of self-worth as a person of African descent? Can you be okay not seeing Black adults everywhere and only seeing Black people, other Black people occasionally, outside your family, of course? I don't know. So moving abroad at this point, a big piece of it is making sure that there is continuity of my sense of humanity and how I want to make sure that that is imparted to my child. But I also think about what can I supplement in terms of how intentional can I be about community building here? Even if the community is small, is it one that interacts with one another? Is it one that supports one another, that has events, that provides opportunities for my child to see themselves reflected in others? How much cultural grounding will I need to do at home to make sure that this child grows up with their sense of self intact? And how close or far away is it from where I grew up? Like, are they going to be able to have regular trips back home to get that grounding? And I'm thinking of the Arabic word to kind of نغوص في البحر of Blackness, but to just have it as another framing. I think some gifts cannot be recreated, but they can be supplemented. They can be replaced with something different, but equally as good. So I know that the DC area could give my child what it gave me. That infrastructure, although it has shifted, it still exists. But the decision I'm working through is really whether whether that same kind of grounding is possible in a different place, either through replication of my experience as much as possible, or through a different configuration that somehow still grounds her in her sense of self. I hope that makes sense. I just think it's important for me, and it's something that I'm committed to doing, is making sure that I am very clear about what my child might lose and might gain for each and every country that we consider. And I'm really curious about how other Black parents are thinking about this. If you are a Black parent and you have moved abroad or are moving abroad, what are you weighing? What did your hometown give you that you want to make sure your children have? What did your hometown not give you that you want to make sure that your children have? I would love to hear about it in the comments. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.